Thank you, Rabbi DeVere, and for all those who are behind the scenes to have been able to make this programming possible. I am delighted to be part of the program and equally honored to be the kickoff presenter. I look forward to a rich and a rewarding learning experience where we all learn from each other and where everybody brings their perspectives and experiences. So first, I'd like to start off by sharing with you what has brought me to the here and now with the following quote from Louise Bourgeois, which I love and says it best for me, that art is not about art, art is about life, and that sums it up. So for me, this is a really profound and powerful statement that makes me want to take it one step further and say, Torah is not about Torah, Torah is about life, and that sums it up. Which leads me to the here, while we are here in this mentorship program, engaging art through Torah, and the question Rabbi DeVere has asked us all to think about. How did I create Torah art in the Amen Institute, and talk about the creative process? Well, for me, this reflects a lifetime and a multitude of experiences to get me to the here and now. So I'd like to journey through getting me here to the here and now with a little bit of history about me, my creative practice, and get you behind my eyes in what affects me and my thinking process and provide insight into my modus operandi, and then tie this into this week's Parsha, Ki Pisa. So for the boring stuff, I was born in Brooklyn, raised in Long Island. I received a BFA, Bradley University, along with a concentration in sociology. I attended Pratt Institute. I lived in Hackensack and Ramsey, New Jersey, and I'm here in Raleigh, North Carolina for the last 28 years. I am a Jew whose journey through Judaism has been with conservative services as a youth, Reform services while my children were growing up, and for the last 11 years attending Chabad services. Excuse me. My relationship with art is best defined through my works called soul selfies. Soul selfies is an overarching term I use to describe my body of work, where people today are taking pictures of themselves with their phones. I'm documenting snapshots of defining moments through my multimedia assemblages and my paper sculptures called Pope People. My work focuses on subjects and experiences that affect the human spirit and soul, exploring conditions and circumstances. So here is gray matter, a defining moment. This is in response to that moment when we look around and we see our parents aging mentally and physically, as well as ourselves and our friends getting up in years. Here, the posturing of this figure expresses the mindset of gray matter, with its head cast downward, a limp arm, sagging belly, and feet grounded in a small, self-contained space. This is the realization that life as it once was has changed. My assemblages are made with powdered pigments, spray paint, modeling medium, and flooding the canvases with water and varnishes. My approach is grounded in the unexpected, spontaneity, chance, and experimentation. And with the fluid nature of this process and the application of the materials, the initial expectation sometimes goes awry, just as in life. I welcome the unanticipated, and I'm comfortable with the risks and failures. My best discoveries and successes are outcomes from just letting go and not forcing the materials or ideas, but rather responding thoughtfully to the circumstantial moment. So since I'm talking about materials and art, I'd like to share a quote from Anselm Kiefer, and where he says, "There is a special border, the border between art and life, that often shifts deceptively. Yet without this border, there is no art. In the process of being produced, art borrows material from life, and the traces of life still shine through the completed work of art. But at the same time, the distance from life is the essence, the substance of art." So what I'm sharing with you on the next several slides are some amazing examples of masterful pieces where this work is transcending ordinary materials and creating a new form in how we witness the world around us. So for me in this Lorenzo Bernini's painting, the glass and the liquid in the glass and the lemon, to me, is so realistic, as though I can reach out and just grab the goblet and drink from it. And what's amazing is that this is on an extremely flat surface of masonite board, and the paint is ever so thin. Here's another example, Tung Ming Ching, with this carved wood. Once again, this is transcending for me because I just feel the envelopment of a cloth around this figure's body, although this is all made out of wood. No explanation needed here. We all know this guy, Michelangelo, and David. Again, from marble to create this magnificent figure, just looking at the hand and the veins, I just feel it's so realistic for me. I feel as though I could just reach out and touch this and shake hands. So why I'm sharing this particular slide, excuse me, is what I love about this is when I first saw this image, I thought it was a lithograph. And I later found out that it was the first photograph that was ever created. So Joseph, I'm not going to say it correctly, Nicephore Nice in 1826, was fascinated with lithography and printing. And he created a camera obscura where he had an 8-hour exposure onto a metal plate and then coated it with oil. So I'm not going to go into the actual details of how that image was actually made into a paper photograph. But what was amazing for me is that my first blush on this, I thought this was a lithograph. And so again, in all of these particular pieces, the material in which they were formed were absolutely transcending. So here's another great quote that I wanted to share with you from Henri Cartier-Bresson. And he's a photographer, and he coined the phrase, decisive moment. And he says, there's nothing in this world that does not have a decisive moment, which he refers to as a photographer's capacity to precisely capture the right instance, and in doing so, shattering normal life to retrieve a transcendent moment. While he's referencing photography, I believe this is absolutely relatable to the other disciplines of art. So going back to Anselm Kiefer's quote, that art borrows material from life and the traces of life still shine through the completed work of art, but yet at the same time, the distance from life is the essence, the substance of art. I think a lot about that statement. So for me, when a defining moment comes into my vision, be it sensory or emotional, I examine what is really important about that moment and carefully consider the materials to best express the narrative. Here is A Wrinkle in Time, and this was produced during the onset of COVID. I was reacting to an incident I had seen on the news where deceased bodies in New York were being buried in a mass grave. This profound incident and image compelled me to make a memorial piece remembering the lives and honoring the souls of those unclaimed victims resulting from this viral pandemic war. A Wrinkle in Time is a memorial for those global victims who died, with each cluster representing continents. There's tracking, tracing, containment, and the spread, with dots representing perished souls. This piece is 7 foot by 4 foot. In sharp contrast to A Wrinkle Time is 1 year later, 2021. This is actually the smallest piece I have ever made. It's 21.5 inches by 15.5 inches. The size differential is interesting. With the beginning of COVID, the world changed in a global moment, hence being that defining moment for me to make A Wrinkle in Time. It was hard for me to wrap my head around the magnitude and scale and the impact that this tiny virus played on all of us. Then, a year later, living with COVID became a bit more normalized, I dare say, and a part of every day and more manageable, and perhaps a reflection of the size of this piece. However, also during this period of time was unrest. There was the Me Too movement, George Floyd, social injustice, 1 year later, 2021, though simple and straightforward in imagery, is a complex and an ambiguous piece. Who and what does this figure represent? Is this COVID related? Suppression of speech? Civil rights? Social injustice? Or something entirely different? Hope People is my current series of work that are life-size sculpture figures formed from cardboard paper. This work is a direct outcome of seeing more people than ever unhomed. Hope People and the material relate to the cardboard messages people hold up and the paper shelters they carry with them, and in my work have become what they carry. The cardboard paper used is ordinary, it's mundane, it's something we use every day. We take it for granted that it's always accessible, and we often discard it without thinking. This work calls attention to the insecurities of life, underscoring marginalized individuals overcome emotionally, physically, financially from the unpredictable uncertainties life poses. With every nook, cranny, and paper fold, hope figures and their stories are not to dehumanize, but rather they are open vessels exposing their souls and their life, emphasizing the burdens that they bear. Imperfections within each story reveal there is beauty within us, even within the frailties of life. So what you see here on screen is a person of interest. Common expressions typically describe each of my works, such as person of interest, papering over the cracks, push comes to shove. So while the straightforward statements, the implications underscore something much, much deeper. A person of interest in a traditional sense is a person believed to be involved in a crime but has not been charged. However, in this case, the crime involved for this person relates to the underserved, living on the streets with insufficient resources and inequities of services. Here is Push Comes to Shove, which gives you a glimpse into my creative process and the raw materials I use, starting from a roll of corrugated cardboard in the lower left-hand corner to drawing out an idea to the completed figure. Push comes to shove typically connotates a critical point where one must commit to take action and decide. In this instant, this piece again is far from conventional. Push comes to shove is another defining moment for me, and it was in response after having seen a well-kept woman moving her mobile home grocery cart on an uneven road filled with her cardboard shelter and her belongings in plastic bags. She moved slow and laborious, pushing and shoving. Her legs were strong and steady with her feet firmly grounded. I wonder where she is today and the countless others pushing and shoving their way through life, if anything has changed for them. While we all have push comes to shove moments, this was mine. It was this experience, seeing that woman, that compelled me to make life-size paper people and express their stories. Park bench residents. I know we've all encountered scenes such as this. Well, here, this person whose home is a bench rests upon their research journals. When we see a situation like this, let's not be too quick to judge what conditions and circumstances brought this person to be here. Oftentimes I'm asked, why does your work have no identifiable head or face? Well, my response to this is that I ask you, when you see a situation like this, do you look or do you glance away? If you do look, would you recognize them out of context? Regardless of your position, we see individuals wherever we go. Their faces become a blur and become undefined, but we remember how they stood or they sat, their body's demeanor and their posture. My work focuses in on those mannerisms and traits and having the viewer to complete the narrative. My work also encompasses found objects, as seen here with chauffeur and the next two slides. It's important for me to share the various mediums I connect, as for me, nothing is static. As life, it presents itself in many forms. These objects, too, were defining moments in my life. each object resonating a deep emotional response, reaching deep into my core as the objects themselves spoke to me, asking for their stories to be told. Here is torso. This was a piece of wood. They were doing some tree work in our backyard, and they turned the piece of wood over, and it just automatically said, I am torso. My creative practice is always open to different opportunities of expression and driven by a catalyst as seen here with Collection Box. The backstory on Collection Box was conceptualized at a time when my husband was reading the names of the Holocaust victims. For this piece, I thought about the countless Jews interned in the concentration camps, being stripped of all material belongings, torn from family and friends. I thought about the strong will of the people to keep their faith and find a special place to express their religious beliefs. This rusted wire frame, wood, twine, and stones, for me, became that protected space for the human spirit, a space where one could go and envision and express compassion and goodwill. Conceptually, this work symbolizes the Nazis' failure to break the Jewish people's character and faith. While the stones in place are markers of injustice, the collection box is about perseverance, endurance, integrity, and hope. And that although there is injustice in this world, the box symbolically reminds us there is still more work to be done. Another facet of my creative practice brings me to my experience with the Alman Institute with the fellowship program, Creating Art Through Torah. This experience paired artists with rabbis to study an assigned Torah portion. I had the esteemed privilege of studying Pekudei, the last chapter in Exodus, with Rabbi Aaron London from the United Kingdom. I have to admit in the beginning it was a bit overwhelming for me to get started. And through my conversations with Rabbi Aaron, she helped me to unpack this portion. I struggled with this portion because it was a bit cut and dry, even though the portion described everything explicitly, all the records, all the materials collected to make the tabernacle. The portion went into great detail about the architecture and its space, talked about the materials and the money, the tasks assigned by Moses and the works by the Levites, all that was necessary to build the tabernacle and a home for God. The portion described vividly the furnishings, the garments for the priest, the breastplate, headgear, how the garments were made, the gold and the silver, the copper, the turquoise, the purple and the scarlet wools, and how the people's donations were combined. However, I still could not latch on to a sticking point. I thought if I were a weaver or jewelry maker, I could create a gorgeous interpretation of a breastplate. I thought about the colors and their meanings and perhaps create a contemporary version of the woven garments. But for me to recreate any of these just did not feel authentic. And I also didn't see how the medium I work with translating to this work in Torah study. I read and I reread the portion, and finally I had that aha moment referencing when Moses was given the instructions to build the tabernacle. However, he knew he could not do this alone. There were many moving parts. There were the Levites, the tradesmen and women to make and create the structure and the garments and to assemble and disassemble the tent of meeting. And I thought about the architectural component and its space. The defining moment for me compelled me to make sculptural forms, that of faces. And circling back to what Moses had thought, he could not do this alone. So I began making a community of people, honoring the people who helped to build the tabernacle. I continued thinking about all that was necessary for the tabernacle and what it meant to be a tabernacle, and decided that the Hebrew text of Pekudei would be the backdrop for these faces of time, as the Hebrew text contained all the information needed to create that tent of meeting. So going back to something I had said earlier with my best discoveries and successes, they are outcomes from just letting go and not forcing the material or ideas, but responding to the circumstantial moment. The defining moment for me in this piece was the strong will of the people to make that tabernacle. And the material would have to have that feeling of being stone-like, and that the faces were not meant to be realistic, but rather to capture what may have been discovered artifacts. The faces of time, those souls who built the tabernacle, and this was a tangible component of my learning experience. The deeper dive into the study experience was the self-discovery, what it meant to be a tabernacle, and made me question, do we need an actual architectural structure to go to? An outcome for me from my studies is that one does not necessarily need an architectural structure to go to, but we, our bodies are that vessel and that architectural space, that of being a tabernacle, a mishkan, wherever we go. In closing, I had mentioned in the beginning I would connect my journey to this week's Torah portion, ki tisa, meaning when you take. A condensed overview of ki tisa can be divided into 3 parts. 1, the conclusion of God's instructions to Moses regarding the making of the Mishkan. 2, the sins of the golden calf. And 3, the granting of the second tablets. I will admit, in reading through this parsha, there was a lot to unpack, each point with a set of monumental instructions and outcomes. I was challenged into which direction to take, and I reached out to Rabbi DeVere for insight. And yes, mentors have mentors and become the mentee. Rabbi highlighted for me that Bezalel had the incredible honor of being described as having Ruach Elohim, a divine spirit, which I was able to connect. So paraphrasing the Parsha, I have filled him with the Spirit of God in wisdom, in understanding, in knowledge, and in all the manner of workmanship to contrive works of art, to work in gold, in silver, and in copper, in cutting of the stones for a setting, and in carving of timbers, to work in all manner of workmanship. So going back to the meaning of ki tisa, meaning when you take, and I have filled him with the Spirit of God, I feel this parsha is more about being given rather than when you take. Bezalel was given the instruction and was also filled with the Spirit of God to make something much more purposeful than brick and mortar. Which takes me back to Louise Bourgeois' quote that art is not about art, art is about life, and that sums it up. We are all filled with the Spirit of God, with the knowledge and wisdom. We are given this at birth. It's not something we can take. It's what we do with those circumstantial, defining, and decisive moments that serves a greater purpose in life. So in closing, I'd like to leave you with the following thought and think of life in the way Crockett Johnson tells this children's story about Harold and the Purple Crayon. If you're not familiar with the book, it was written in 1955. Harold is a young boy who goes out for a walk with his purple crayon in his hand, and he uses his crayon to draw himself an amazing adventure and solve problems that he encounters along the way. Everyone has their journey to get to the here and now. This was my journey, and it continues to be. Thank you.